Hi, my name is Rebecca Fitzgerald. I am currently a fourth year education student at QUT. I am going to be talking to you today about standards 1 to 5 in regards to my two most recent placements. So, my placement last year was a year 1 class at St Columba's Primary School, and my placement this year was a year 5 6 composite class at Stafford State School. So, my standards relate to those two field experiences. Okay, I'm going to start with standard 1, which is know the students and how they learn. So basically for me, on my first day of placement, I sit and observe my students. I get to know their interests, their learning needs, their behaviours, um, all that type of stuff. I also ask some questions when I do the roles, so it might be, what's your favourite food? This way it allows me to get to know my students better on a more personal level. Always print out the class roll, write little dot points next to each child's name. This way when I go home and I plan my lessons, I'm really catering to their needs. Obviously I'm always understanding and accepting of their cultural and religious backgrounds. Also, working in small groups really helps me to understand and get to know my students better. And in regards to differentiation and diversity, I've always got fast finisher activities available. I'm always facilitating higher order thinking, prompting discussion for those, lower level children. Use of repetition and repeating my answers, repeating questions, all that type of stuff. So an example of knowing my students and how they learn is in my grade 1 science lesson. Instead of learning about flies via a worksheet, we actually made a huge giant fly and labelled it as a class. We also integrated a bit of art with it and used collage as well. And at the end of the unit, all of the students could tell me the parts of the fly and they absolutely loved it. So that was really cool. Okay, moving on to standard 4. I've done standard 4 here because it aligns with my grade 1 class. You'll see why. So, of course, explicit expectations and instructions at the beginning of my lessons, always. I think it's so important for the students to know where they're headed. Always write a Walt and a Wilf. We are learning to, and what I'm looking for on the whiteboard clearly. This is just so that, again, the students know where they're headed and why they are learning what they are learning. Again, fast finishes activity on the board to ensure fewer questions and less disruption in my class. Students know once they finish their work, they look up, they know what to do next. They don't need to be asking me, Miss, what do I need to do next? Of course, always use hands-on activities in everything, including maths. We did subtraction bowls where we would, I'd have cups set up and my students would roll balls down and then would take away, that type of stuff in subtraction, just to make it a bit more engaging and fun. I used a pom-pom jar as a whole group behaviour management strategy, and the kids loved it. They loved seeing the pom-poms go in. So I'd do something like, if all students can show me that they're on task and working, you'll all get 5 pom-poms that go into that jar. And it worked super well. And also then I could do the opposite and take those pom-poms away if the behaviour was not up to standards. And the children knew that, so they worked extremely hard. And of course, I used my manners and I was always modelling good behaviour. And I think that's so important as a teacher because obviously your students are going to look up to you. And again, just having all the instructions and information on the board, students knew what they were doing. There was no confusion, everything was clear. So I think that's, a really good way to create and maintain a supportive and safe learning environment. And also being very inclusive of all students, regardless of any background, disability, or whatever it is. I think that's super important. So making them feel welcome and their opinion valued. Yes. Okay, let's move on to standard number 2. Standard number 2, knowing the content and how to teach it. Obviously, I made sure all my lessons align with the Australian curriculum. If I was teaching a Year 5 Design and Technology subject, straight to the Australian curriculum, tick, 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 make sure it all aligns. Of course, embedding the general capabilities as well, whether it be numeracy or literacy or both. I think that's really important. Then, they're the two main learning objectives. So whether it's reading or writing or whatever, that was always integrated into my lessons. I personally would read through my lessons prior to teaching them in front of a group of students, and I made sure I knew exactly what I was going to teach. And if I didn't, thoroughly research it so that I was completely prepared for whatever questions my students would fire at me. Okay, I would also go over anything that the students might think is difficult. This way I knew I could devise a plan of how to teach that difficult concept before it had even come up. Especially as a prac student, I think that's important. I didn't want to be standing there going, oh, I don't know what to say. So I was always very well prepared in that way. And of course, using the pedagogy I do, we do, you do to teach new concepts. Love it. Love the gradual release of responsibility. And again, I've started using warm-ups. So going over old concepts, and then it's a really, really good way to retain that old information. It's like a mnemonic device, not only for the kids, but for me as well. So yeah, I've just got the example there that like when I was doing my design and technology lesson in year 5, I really had to know, because it was on bridges, I really had to know the different types of bridges, how bridges were made, all the different types of bridges in Brisbane, because I'm from Cairns, so I really had to get that background knowledge before I taught that lesson. Okay, standard 3, plan for and implement effective teaching and learning. So of course, planning in advance, knowing what resources I need, having those resources ready prior to the lesson commencing so that it's all organised and I'm not wasting my students' time. At the beginning of the lesson, I say, you need a pencil, a rubber, and a book. That's it. This clears their desk, clears any confusion, and it's just the students know exactly what they need, and it makes the lesson run a lot smoother. Transitioning, really important for me. If I need a group of kids to go get, if everyone in the class needs to get glue sticks, I'll send a small group and then slowly send more and more. I think transitioning is really important. Backwards mapping, obviously, again, then, looking at that assessment, looking at what you want those kids to be able to do, and then working backwards is really important. And going back to having my outline of the lesson on the board, this helps me so much with bulk questions and interruptions. At any age, they're still like, Miss, what do I do next? Or how do we do this? So if it's on the board, I just simply point to the board. I don't even have to speak, which is really good because the kids know then, look at the board, they stop asking the questions. And again, the I do, we do, you do pedagogy to teach new concepts, and design unit plans is exactly what I always do. So in my year 5 design and technology unit where we made bridges, I used the I do section and I literally drew the bridge on the board for them to see, and I made a bridge at home and brought it in. Then in the we do, we did it together and we made a bridge together. Then in the you do, that's when they had the opportunity to make their own bridge. And then that was used as assessment purposes. So they knew exactly what to do because it was explicitly modelled throughout that entire unit. So every single one of those students passed because they knew what to do. It was modelled clearly. And moving on to the last standard that I'm going to talk about today, which is standard 5, assessment. So obviously I worked with the year 5 teaching team on my last placement, and we made a design task sheet and marking rubric. I modelled through the whole unit what an A standard, C standard and fail was, so those students knew what was expected. Diagnostic assessment was used at the beginning in the means of a KWL chart, what we know, what we want to know, and what we've learned, and we always referred back to it, which was so good to visually see our learning unfold. It was really, really good, and something that I'll use in my future practice. Formative assessment, obviously ongoing feedback that was verbally, through writing, observations and anecdotal notes. And summative assessment was used at the end of the unit to assess their work in relation to the Australian curriculum. And at the end of the entire unit, both the classes got together and we moderated all the marks to ensure that there was, equality within our grading system. So yes, thank you for listening to my presentation.